Hey everybody, this is Ian O'Byrne. I am coming to you as the Multi-Literacies Department Editor for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. What we've been doing is putting together a series of columns where we look at reading, writing, participating on the internet, thinking about how we could introduce technology in literacy instruction. With each one of these columns, I've reached out to experts in the field to have discussions with them to figure out the full complexity of what we're presenting in the columns. We want to put together a resource that gives you the unadulterated, straight skinny on what this all means. So for the smart, savvy educators out there that want to figure out how to bring any of this work in their classroom, we can talk to the experts and figure out the good and the bad of what's happening. And so with that, this interview, I'm really excited to bring one of my good friends on, Doug Belshaw. Doug, you want to introduce yourself? Tell us what you do online.
I can try, yeah. So I'm Doug Belshaw, and I am Director of Dynamic Skillset, my new consultancy. Until recently, I was Web Literacy Lead for the Mozilla Foundation, which is why I know you, Ian, because you were a very active contributor on the Web Literacy Map. So I worked for Mozilla for 3 years, worked on badges. Before that, worked in higher education with JISC, and I'm a former history and ICT teacher and school senior leader. So that's me.
Very cool. So with this column, we looked at the web literacy map that we gave it an overview of the web literacy map and how it's currently constructed. One of the things that we've talked about in the column and in some of the other videos, the other interviews, is that it still is a work in progress or process, but it's not completed and it never will be. And I think that's beautiful. At the beginning of all this, why? You know, why did Mozilla, why did the community band together to develop these web literacies?
So I actually thought that the web literacy map in the beginning, which was the web literacy standard, if you remember, was actually a terrible idea. And the reason for that is because I wrote my doctoral thesis on digital literacies. And through the process of spending 6-7 years part-time doing that, I found that actually, we're not talking about a single digital literacy. We're talking about a plurality of literacies, context dependent. They need to be socially negotiated, all that kind of stuff. So I just spent 6 years basically arguing that you can't nail down these things. And then my boss at the time, Erin Knight, who was Director of Learning at Mozilla, she's now at the Badge Alliance Executive Director. She said, why don't we do a web literacy standard? You know, Mozilla is all about standards. Let's do this kind of thing. And I argued and railed against her for ages. And then we just went on with it anyway. And I got to realize that actually the web is different from digital stuff, because you can draw a circle around the kinds of stuff which constitutes the web, and you can't really draw a circle around the stuff that's digital. So you can actually define the skills that you need to read, write, and participate on the web. So that was the starting point. We might get on to why we ended up dropping the name standard, web literacy standard, and going with map instead. But yeah, that was the starting point. I think deciding that, you know, Mozilla cares about the web and cares about people being able to be successful on the web. And Mitchell Baker's got a whole spiel about that, about people, you know, leveling up their skills, being fully participants in society through the web, all this kind of stuff. But if you don't know what those skills are that you need to be able to get better, then you've just got for-profit companies who are telling you that you need to use their app, or you need to be able to press buttons in this order. And I think it's a lot more than that. There's mindsets, there's skill sets, there's all the stuff which are in the web literacy map. And I guess it developed from there. And I'm really pleased at how it ended up with version 1.1, which is the most recent one, which has just been released. And we've come a long way, I think, over the last 2.5-3 years.
So this isn't the next question I wanted to head to, and I'm already breaking my rule immediately. You know, but you brought it up. It's you know, when I talk with my colleagues from like Australia and we talk about naming things, they always rail back and they say, why do you have to name everything? Can't it just be? And so the challenge is, you know, I come from the New Literacies Research Lab. This is the multi-literacies department. You know, you've done a lot of work in digital literacy. Is it important? You know, you said initially you thought it wasn't really important and a stupid idea. Is it important for us to name it in order to be able to level up and have these literacies?
So let me just say that part of my reflecting on my time at Mozilla and working on a global basis, I still am working on a global basis, although the clients I have at the moment tend to be very much UK focused. One of the things I did realize is exactly that Americans, in particular, North Americans, are very interested in naming all of the things. So I don't know if it's just British Reserve or whatever it is, but we don't tend to have names for everything. We just have kind of like, oh, that thing. Whereas Americans tend to like to nail things down. And that's actually can be quite a useful thing to do. I've got this whole thing on ambiguity. I can perhaps point towards this in some of the show notes. But there's certain types of ambiguity which are unproductive and not very useful. But then there's some kinds of ambiguity which can be quite useful and productive. So I think what we're doing with the web literacy map is allowing enough ambiguity in there for it to be able to be applied to a particular context, but stripping away some of that unhelpful ambiguity so that people aren't just lost at sea and think that anything goes.
No, I love the concept of ambiguity. I used it in a talk at LRA, at Literacy Research Association. I think that when we talk about any of this, we need a certain amount of ambiguity or wiggle room. We can't say this is what blogging is online, because as soon as you say that, it's null and void.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the challenge. It's my advisor, Don Liu, he called it deixis. Things are always changing. So even as we're saying it, things are changing.
So I actually love talking about ambiguity even more than I like talking about literacies. And there's a philosopher called, so I did my first degree in philosophy, as I think I've told you before. And there's a philosopher called Richard Rorty, and he talked about the concept of dead metaphors. So this is when things are basically over-defined to the extent that they have no wiggle room, to use your phrase, but they form what he calls the coral reef of which things can be built up and above. So to some extent, it can be useful to kill an idea so that you can build on it. But whilst you're in the moment and you're actually trying to do some work with it, it needs to have that wiggle room, that ability to be flexible and be applied to different contexts. And I think we've done quite a good job with the web literacy map in that particular way of doing things.
I agree. I think, part of the challenge in building this up from whole cloth is that, along the way, we had a challenge, as Carla would frequently remind us, we were trying to be descriptive. We're just describing what we see online. What does it mean to be fully web literate? We're out there, we're missionaries or whatever. We're figuring out what it means and what it looks like. We're not prescriptive. We're not telling people yet how to get there.
No.
And so the challenge was, the beauty in all of it is that we all came together and we had a lot of heated discussions about what these things mean. And we had to remind ourselves that we needed that ambiguity, that wiggle room. As the leader of that whole initiative over those years, I'm interested to know from you, what did you learn along the process of guiding the community through that, of building up things from whole cloth? I don't know what you mean.
Sorry, I don't know what you mean by whole cloth.
Well, from nothing.
Right. Okay.
So we built this up from nothing, and then all of a sudden, we have this map. What did you learn along the way about building up a set of literacies or standards? What did you learn about working with the community to get a lot of like but unlike minds to figure out what it means to be literate in a space?
So the first thing is that not everybody who there's always going to be an element of benevolent dictatorship around these kinds of things. You need somebody who's going to make the decision at the end if people can't agree. And that happened to be me. Sometimes it wasn't me. Sometimes it was other people, actually. And going forward, it won't be me because I'm part of the Mozilla community, but I'm not a paid contributor anymore. So it might be someone else, Laura Hilliger, who I know you've interviewed, and that kind of those kind of people. So there needs to be someone to do that. Also, two things. The type of people sometimes people rock up with a lot of knowledge, but they might not be the right people to actually move the whole thing forward. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, it might be because they're just not very good at working collaboratively. And you and I both know, without naming names, some people who have turned up to some meetings and just want to tell us how it is rather than like work collaboratively and rub the edges off each other. But then there's also some people who are a bit disingenuous in the sense of they didn't learn their web skills like that, yet they want to be entirely prescriptive, to use your thing before about, oh, well, you have to learn the web like this. You need to And these tend to be actually programmers, people of a very technical mindset, like, oh, well, you need to do this and then this and this. And they didn't learn like that. So I find that very disingenuous. So that's the kind of negative side of things, you know, being a dictator and telling people to go away sometimes who, in a nice way, who showed up. In terms of the positive stuff, just going back to what I said before about the difference between some of the other new literacies and web literacy. Sometimes people don't recognize web literacy as a legitimate area of study. So, for example, I had a book proposal rejected by MIT Press because the people who were on the board said, you know, everybody's web literate these days. You just go on the internet and everything's easy. So why would we need a book about that? There's all that kind of stuff. But the thing which I learned from a positive point of view is you never know where the innovation is going to come from. Like you think that, well, what would this person know about this particular field? But they've got such insight because they're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis with the kids they're trying to teach. Or they might not be teaching kids, but they've got some insight because they've had to help in a community center, or they've just done a lot of thinking in this area, or whatever it is. So inviting everybody in and not being selective from the outset is actually really good. And then adopting that kind of release cycle that we did, where we set ourselves fairly arbitrary goals, but we tried to meet them. And we forced ourselves towards deadlines. So we didn't just let deadlines slip. I mean, sometimes we did, but on the main, what we decided to do was, well, we're going to have to make some hard decisions because we've got a deadline coming up. It might be the Mozilla Festival. It might be that we've said we're going to have this released by the end of April, whatever it's going to be. And then you make sacrifices sometimes to get things out of the door. And that's what you do with software. That's what you do with anything where you've got some kind of production schedule. And actually worked pretty well, I think.
I agree. I think one of the things I really appreciated about the work that you did as the benevolent dictator is there was that point in time where you reached out to members of the community, and we sort of had reflection and feedback. You know, you had a huge request for feedback where you would interview people and you'd analyze and get themes to figure out where we stood. We brought this thing to Literacy Research Association to get some feedback, and all of that content is available online. So, I mean, with all of this, we're bringing in different people and interviewing them to see what this web literacy map could and should be. There already is a lot of great content that's out there available for people to take a look at. So all those interviews are online, all the research that you did with it, the content from LRA is online.
And just to say on that, actually, sorry to interrupt you, the reason for doing that was to, sometimes it's like when you're managing people, sometimes people will say stuff to you in a one-on-one situation that they, even if it's recorded, that they wouldn't say to you in a group setting. There's something about the different dynamic. There was a survey as part of that, so people who could respond asynchronously, especially if English isn't their first language, you often find that they might not be able to have this kind of conversation with you in the same way that I wouldn't be able to have this conversation in French. But if you gave me something in French, I might be able to write an answer to it. Yeah, that kind of.
And one of the challenges, the reason why I think it's intriguing, and I saw this happen with the work at the New Literacies Research Lab and then working with you and Mozilla and everybody else on the Web Lit Map, is it's kind of interesting to, you know, build this up from nothing, but be open and transparent and document things along the way. You know, because I think that at the end of the day, we can look at version 1.1 or 1.5 and say, oh, this is great, this looks fantastic, but unless you were there along all of those conference calls, which all of those are on the Internet Archive now, you know, and they're blogged about, you know, multiple times by multiple people, you don't realize the really tough decisions that we made along the way. So people would show up 6 months in and then say, hey, we should have more identity here. And we're like, oh, everybody take the jewelry off now, you know?
Yeah. No, I think that's important. While you were saying that about the LRA conference, which you kindly managed to get me to in Florida at the end of last year. And that particular conference, when I was on the way back, I don't think I've ever said this to you, Ian, is that I recognized that, so my go-to example of this kind of stuff is Bluetooth. So when we use Bluetooth now, we don't even think about it on our phones. Like, it's just something which is very straightforward and easy. But I can remember before the year 2000 getting excited about Bluetooth. and realizing that it took 10 years to have that adopted, yeah, as a technology. And so when you talk to, I'm going to use the example of programmers again, people on the cutting edge of technology, and they're saying, why are you recommending, or I think a particular example was, why are you saying that people should host their websites and upload via FTP when everyone uses GitHub and, you know, much more agile development stuff these days? Or at the LRA conference, why are you presenting it as a competency grid, which is a very old-fashioned way of looking at literacies? And what I think is important when you actually want to do some productive work is that you're going to have to be out of step for a little bit of time with the cutting edge, because that's where people are. Meet people where they are. You can't say, well, this is the cutting edge technology, this is the cutting edge research, so we're going to be right up to that point. You kind of have to take a step back and even maybe look at the research and the technology that was coming out a couple of years ago, because where people are operating in terms of the main part of the bell curve, which is at the end of its influence.
It's one of the challenges in doing this. You know, sometimes we do have to take a little bit of a step back, you know, make it more approachable, you know, use less jargon and make it just crisp and clear and make what we're doing much more approachable. And we know from the traditional publication schedule, you know, it takes a while for research to change what's happening in the classroom. And by then it's probably null and void. So what would it take? What does it take in your expertise to make the web literacy map and that initiative change what's happening in the classroom? So, I mean, going back to yourself as the teacher, how do we make change based on what we wrote up in the web literacy map?
So for better or for worse, there's something about the visual nature of communication. We both interviewed Brian Mathers recently, and he talks about cognitive ease. It's wonderful to work so closely at the moment with somebody who can not only has a mindset that used to be a programmer, is a programmer, but also can draw really well, self-taught. There's something about the cognitive ease of that. So never underestimate the power of visuals. You know, they say a picture paints 1,000 words. It's a cliche. But literally, if you give somebody a massive report and say, there you go, or you give them a diagram which they can understand, the diagram is going to help so much. So there's that. I'm also a huge believer, and you've already alluded to this, about having a URL for everything, because I think you can really build on stuff if you can reference other people's work. So the power of working openly at Mozilla means that you build on top of stuff rather than like working within siloizations do. So if there's a URL for everything, for this conversation, for the week, for this document that I've just had an idea about, you can reference all these, and people can very quickly grok what's going on. Now, the shame, I think, about the web literacy map, and I've tried to influence this over the years, is that there's not a URL for each particular part of the map. So Mozilla's even gone a step backwards, I would say, since I left. When version 1.1 came out, there's no longer, as far as I can see, a link for each competency. There's only a link to the map, and you can't link directly to a competency. Now, from an open badges point of view, that's a real shame, because it means that you can't put in the standards field or in whatever field you want to in the metadata specification, you can't put that particular competency. I'd like to see it go even a step further. I'd like to see a URL for the map, a URL for the competency, and a URL for the skill. And I'd also like to see that version. So saying that I'm going to align with version 1.0 of the web literacy map, version 1.1, whatever it is, to avoid that unhelpful ambiguity. So that would be my recommendation. It's not like I haven't tried enough within Mozilla to get to this, but it's an engineering decision rather than a pedagogical one.
Somebody should do something about that.
I think
so the last question I have for you is, you know, how does this work? You know, you spend a lot of time studying digital literacy and literacy on the internet and other communication technologies. When we 5-10 years from now, when we step back and we look at this, how does this web literacy initiative, or how do you think it will relate and interconnect to the other theories and standards and principles that we have out there? So you're the digital literacy or the multi-literacies or my new literacies. How do you see this all interconnecting, you know, in the future?
So, as you know, the new literacies landscape is extremely fragmented, and it's not it's a very difficult place to get into if you are somebody who's just, you know, Joe teacher trying to find out some new stuff. I've tried to put some stuff out there with my digital literacies work. I think the web literacy map is a good starting point. The trouble is with the web literacy map, it's not everything that people would want to teach in a curriculum. So the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, who use the web literacy map as the core of their kind of digital literacy kind of curriculum, had to add stuff to it. So what I would really encourage new literacies researchers to do is to try and build on each other's work. I mean, obviously that happens to a degree, but as you and I both know, the number of people who try and carve out new areas rather than trying to build on what's gone before is huge. I mean, I remember the term electracy being coined back in 2004-ish, and just thinking like, this is just a researcher trying to carve out their own niche rather than building on what's gone before. And I think if there's anybody who does build on stuff that's gone before, it's people like Colin Lancashire and Michelle Noble. It's some of the people you've already talked to in terms of your supervisor, Don, yourself. You know, there is a groundswell of up-and-coming people who are willing to build on other people's work rather than just try and pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. But I think in terms of the impact of the web literacy map, I think it'll be seen as another step towards a way in which we can push back on the monopolies, the big web giants, and just and consuming the web. I think it's a step towards Mozilla's goal and other people's goal, the EFF, other people, of being able to write the web as well.
Very cool. So I thank you for taking the time. I have about 35 other questions that I could ask, but I want to keep myself honest here. Where can people find you online? So if people see this and they say, oh, I love what this guy's got to talk about, where do you hang out on the internet?
So just go to dougbelshaw.com. That's with one L, so BELSHAW. And all my blogs and social media presences are linked to from there, of which there are quite a few. Yeah.
And I will put links underneath when I send this out. I gotta get a new theme for my WordPress site, and then I'll send it out ahead of time. But this video and all the extra content. How do we get in touch with you as a consultant?
So I'm at dynamicskillset.com. Thanks, Ian. Dynamicskillset.com. So if you want to email it, hello@dynamicskillset.com, or just go to the website. I have a monthly newsletter that you can sign up to for my consultancy. I also got a weekly newsletter that you might want to sign up to in terms of just the random stuff I come across, which often has digital literacies and open badger stuff in.
What can we get if we go to Dynamic Skillset? What sort of consultancy do you offer?
So at the moment, so kind of digital strategy, and in particular at the moment, the two things that I've focused in Mozilla on, which are like digital and new literacies and open badges. So I'm helping clients at the moment, especially focus on like getting up to speed on open badges and just being able to help them understand the area of digital and new literacies, because it's quite a confusing landscape, like I said. But anything in terms of digital strategy, like how you get from where you are now to where you want to be, like I can help with that.
Very cool. So once again, the column is in Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. It is the multi-literacies department. Basically, this last column we looked at web literacy and the web literacy map. Over the course of these different columns, we've been trying to make sense of what it means to read, write, participate, communicate, collaborate online. We've had columns on badges, open learning. We have one coming up on coding and gaming. And so we're really trying to get different perspectives and provide guidance for educators to figure out what's the first step to make this happen. So we encourage you to read the column. We have the column is out available on the internet. We have pre-production versions of this column on my blog, and Doug has shared it out, so please go read it and comment on it. We have different interviews that are out on YouTube, so you can see it. Please read it, respond, reach out to us, send us tweets, send us video responses, but we'd love to have to know what you think about it. And if you have bigger questions, have us come on out. Get us a cup of coffee, have us come out and chat and see what this could look like in your classroom. And so with that being said, thank you very much.